Good afternoon, all. So I had a really cool conversation today in regards to the upcoming election and thoughts about protesting, because we all know there's going to be protests during these upcoming elections. The big question came down to how we do it and what we do. Will it be like when we were in 2020? And the big conversation we had was, should we be peaceable or not? And it came right down to it is the argument came out, there's no laws that say we have to be. There's no laws for that. And I said, you do know your constitutional rights and why you're violating it. So essentially what this one is they want to talk about your constitutional rights and the fact that some people are just telling you to violate them. Uh, let's kind of get into it. First, I'm going to share a little bit about what the Constitution's about. Give it 1 second here. U.S. Constitution, share. So when we're talking about the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment is probably the most important one, and most people just do not know a whole lot about it. First Amendment actually gives you the right of open speech, but it's even more. There are certain protections that we kind of take for granted, but we kind of don't really understand them. Let's kind of go through step by step the First Amendment, because I think that's an area where people really just don't know their rights. Give me a second here. I'm not as fast doing this by myself. I miss having a team with me when I'm doing it. So let's talk about the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. A lot of people will get into the argument over, religious rights. I'm not worried about that for this year. The bridging the freedom of speech, that's where we have the advantage. We don't need a bunch of laws to tell us what our rights of freedom of speech are. They're just talking about literally abridging it. It's not a possibility. Or of the press, that's another thing that's really important. It's helped us out, years and years in the past of having our own strong press in our communities, and it's protected under the Constitution. Now, this is the most important one: the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. And this is what really killed us last time, is people just said there is no requirement for being peaceable when we're protesting. And technically there isn't. There isn't a law in the books that says you have to be peaceably protesting, but also there's no law in the book that says you're protected if you're not peaceably protesting. Whereas the First Amendment gives you that protection ahead of time without need of a law. They have to make a law that regulates it, but they can't take the ability to be peaceably protesting away from you. And that's key, and that's important, because as we go into this election cycle, there will be protests. There will be people who are unsatisfied with whoever gets elected. It could be if Biden gets reelected or if Trump gets elected. Either way, there will be protests. The big difference is, are we going to be the protesters that are basically being violent, not being peaceable, doing something that's a misdemeanor or a felony? Because those things will basically take away our protections from the Constitution wise, and then allows police to do something like tear gas and everything else. And we can't have that happen. Not this time around. Our children are going to be out there, our friends and our family are going to be out there. So we really need to know how to protest in a way that's going to, one, allow us to speak the most important things for us in our community to the leadership that's out there, and make sure they understand that we may not be satisfied with what they're doing. And number two, ensure that the police are there to protect us from counter protesters and those who may become violent from the other side, versus being there to arrest us. And that's really key. And then we can hold the police civilly responsible if they either, one, arrest us when we're being peaceable, or two, do not protect us from those who are not being peaceable towards us during our protests. And that's really key coming into protesting. Now, there's a few more things about protesting that we do need to talk about, and those would be your rights as a protester. And a lot of people don't know those rights. The ACLU has a really good guide for it, and it's going to be in the description below. That, and also the Constitution and the recent ruling from the Supreme Court, or lack thereof ruling to rule one way or the other and allowing a case to move forward. the thing about this particular most important thing about the ACLU's path for protected rights as a protester is you need to know what they are so that you don't accidentally get pushed into the wrong situation and or given bad advice. The ACLU has been doing a lot of work to protect our community for a lot of years, and I think it's very important that we start utilizing those tools and support systems to be in a very strong position. So let's take a look at what the ACLU says we should do. Okay. Know your rights. So as we all know, we talk about the First Amendment being able to protest, say what you got to say, do what you got to do. And I agree with it. I mean, if you got to say, you got to do it. But here's the thing. If you're an organizer, you need to know what your rights are. So the rights are the strongest as they known as traditional public forum. In other words, that means you can be out in the streets, parks, sidewalks, any place to be open to the public, plazas in front of government buildings and stuff like that, as long as you don't block access. Remember, this is very, very key. You do not block access, and you tell the people who are with you not to block access. Private property owners. This has been one of the issues last time, and you really have got to be very, very careful and get permission. And I make sure you get written permission and a video permission from private owners as to what you can do, so nobody can say that, well, this private owner said you can't do this, no, that. So private owners can't set the rules for free speech on their property. And that's property ownership. So that's a little bit different. If you're in a public sphere, you have freedom of speech. If you are in someone else's private property, technically they can still control certain parts of your freedom of speech because it's their property and their rights. Counter protesters. This is where we really had a lot of issues the last time. Is they can say what they want to say too, and you cannot threaten those protesters. Basically, they're both equal. You can't be antagonistic. You can't, to the point where you're developing violence, developing beyond verbal banter or verbal confrontation. If it starts digressing into a violence or into something that would be a misdemeanor or a felony, you really shouldn't be doing it. Be careful there. And if you're an organizer, you need to be aware of what people are doing. And it's very important for the next part here before I go into individuals. When you're lawfully present in any space, you have the right to be photographed. And that's very important. You can photograph them, but also they can photograph you. But if you're on a private property, whoever owns that property has the right to dictate those rules for photography and video. That's important. As for permits needed, you do need permits in certain situations. If you don't obstruct traffic and you don't obstruct cars, you can protest on the streets. But if you do obstruct traffic, they can ask you to move over, and they can also ask you to get a permit. Parades, you definitely have to get one. Rallies of certain sizes, you have to get one. It's really not that hard to get the things on there. Remember, there are rules for how loud you can be and things like that. That can be controlled under restrictions too. Just make sure you follow those up. Permits can't be denied if it's an unpopular view. There should be a way to get permits, the fees reviewed. If you believe your rights are violated, always take a photograph for injuries. Always get information from witnesses. Also get consent if you're ever taking audio from any of the witnesses of the situation. Don't just randomly take audio, because they can eventually say, for example, they don't want their voice or their likeness and sound to be out there. They can't stop you from taking a photo, but they can stop you from using that audio as evidence for yourself, because they can also say, I did not consent. So make sure that you get consent for the audio. Now, to continue on with this, I'm going to make a little pause here, because if you're saying I'm attending a protest, I'm not going to get into that yet because there's something very key that just came from the Supreme Court's, actually the lack of action by the Supreme Court. So you definitely want to take a look at this. With the Supreme Court, they made a very unique decision to not overturn the Fifth Circuit and allow this case to move forward. You definitely want to pay attention to this. Let me share this real quick. Verbalizes a specific way, basically saying that the Supreme Court allows lawsuit that free speech advocates warn will threaten the right to protest. That's not exactly how that works. What it is in the protest in Louisiana, there was a Black Lives Matter protest. Somebody was injured in that protest, and that was a rock-like object. So an officer was hit by a rock-like object was thrown by an unidentified protester. But the police officer sued McKinnison because he's a protest organizer. Now, in the Fifth Circuit, they allowed it. It was 2-1, Fifth Circuit. And Fifth Circuit's not that conservative. Fifth Circuit is pretty down the middle type circuit. And they allowed this lawsuit to move forward. And basically, the judge is saying that it's unquestionable that the person who threw the rock should be responsible, one of the dissidents, but it shouldn't be the person who put the protest together. Now, the other two said the opposite. It's going to be kind of strange here. Depending on how this goes, the circuit courts, the only thing above them is the Supreme Courts. If this stands and this stays and looks like it's going to stay, if you're an organizer of a protest, there's some liability to you now. There's a precedent set with this case that you are now responsible for what and how people act in a protest if you're the one who's organizing it. And this could include too damages and liability. So be careful now about being uncivil protests, because you could end up in a shitload of trouble and have a lot of financial responsibility. And I don't want that on anybody, because I think they're really trying to push a different advocacy towards protests this coming up year. And I believe they're going to be pushing more towards peaceably, and they are definitely going to be putting some people in jail over not being peaceable. Now let's continue on with the ACLU. The ACLU really gave a great guide. This is the same guide I gave my children, because man, they really got down to the nitty gritty and got this down good. Now, your rights, as a person, you have the right to basically be there and protest. You have the right to speak in public. You can be in plazas and all the rest. Private owners, once again, can set the rules on their private property. Counter protesters have free speech rights too. Don't forget that. They do have just as much right as you do. Police will keep you apart if it is too antagonistic. If it starts to get violent, I'm saying misdemeanor, felony level, direct violence, or aggressions. Your protection to being peaceably is not covered in that, so I would definitely recommend that you be aware and do not put yourself in those bad situations. You do have the right to photograph anything in plain sight, including federal buildings, police. When you're on private property, make sure that you're following whatever that private property owner's request is. You do not have the right to march in the middle of the streets if it obstructs traffic or pedestrian traffic. You can't get a permit for that. It's generally done by the organizers, but you don't have the right to just block traffic. Now, you do have the right to go on the passive ways and walk on the street. They can't stop you from doing that unless there is actual city laws that prevent you from walking on the street. There's a little more stuff like that. So when they say you don't need a permit, that's not 100% true because there's other things there that you might have to do. Write down everything, get that contact information from witnesses, do get a video if possible. Make sure you get consent at the beginning of the video. So how I'd recommend getting consent on the beginning of a video is when you start a video up with somebody with your phone, just say, start a video up and go, can you please tell me your first name, last name, and then give consent that you're doing this video. And you give consent to be both your image and your voice to be recorded. And if you do that, you're generally protected. I do video production, so I'm always asking for consent before I go any further. And if they say no, then I just won't take their information. If they say yes, go ahead. You can still take a photo of them. You can actually take a video of them if you can find a way of stopping their sound from being recorded. There's a couple ways to do that. I'll do that in another video because that has to do with video production side, but it's the same thing. You can write a complaint. Depending on how your rights were violated, you can also go for a civil case. Don't go for a criminal case because you're never going to win those. Always go for civil cases, in my opinion. This isn't legal advice. No way, shape, and form is legal advice, but this is just, a guide. I guide that you don't do that. What happens if police issue an order to disperse your protest? Just shut the damn thing down. Disperse it. Be reasonable in complying, and then basically get the details and everything else. File a complaint, and then restart another protest the next day, or protest in another location. It's not that difficult. Can't protest on this street. Get your ass up. Go to that street over there. Then they have to come over there and they give a reasonable reason why you can't protest there. And if they can't, they can fucking go away. But at least, disperse when ordered. Don't make it too much of an issue. All right. When you are lawfully present in a place, you have the right to do photographing in plain sight. That is true, except for private property. And notice it said photograph. You don't have the right to take the audio of anybody without their permission in most states. Now, there are some states that allow you to do it, but say, for example, Washington State, they don't. You literally have to have the consent of the other person, or they can't take it. And here's where it comes down to, right here. If you are videotaping, be aware that there's an important legal distinction between visual photographic recording, fully protected, and audio portions of the video, which some states have tried to regulate under state wiretapping laws. And this is true. And this is the reason why I always say get consent. Or if you're taking video with this and you do not want to lose your video, make sure you find a way not to record the audio. And there's several different tricks for doing it. One of the ones I do is I will connect this little adapter. They're like $10. These things right here, this little dinky adapter. When you plug it in, this becomes your microphone. And the best way to guarantee that it is your microphone, get a TRS cable like this one here that has 3 little lines on it. TRRS cable. Plug it into there. Once that's plugged in, no audio is being recorded. None whatsoever. Just the video. That's key and important. You can get them for iPhones, you can get them for Android phones, but you don't want to record the audio unless you've been given permission. When you've been given permission, you can record audio all you want. Now, there are some camera apps like iPhone apps now where you don't have to use that. There's one from Blackmagic Design that allows you to set up your audio levels. It's called the Blackmagic camera, and you can actually shut down all the audio levels, and then you can take video all you want. If you believe your rights have been violated, everything I said before, get the badge numbers, get the contact information, take photos and injuries, and then video. These are your rights, what to do if you've been stopped by. Don't argue, don't obstruct. If you ask to leave, calmly walk away. If you're under arrest, you have the right to ask any otherwise questions. You have the right for a local call. If you believe your rights have been violated, once again, just do a civil complaint, do an affair. It's very important that you do these as civil complaints. And this is ACLU saying that. Essentially, what it really means is getting them criminally is almost impossible, but getting them civilly is very easily. It's a big difference. But if you don't know the difference between the two, it's going to make a big difference in the case you're going to get. This has been 20 minutes. As long as I really want to go on it, this is the basics of it. If this helps, great. If it doesn't, I'm just now starting to get back into the swing of doing these. I'm usually on the other side of the camera. I'm usually with the mics and setting up other stuff. Uh, Love my office here, so I got a nice little spot I can do these little videos. This will be probably one of many in the series where the upcoming protests are going to happen. I really, really want our community's voice to be heard, but I also don't want it to be snuffed out because a few people don't understand how to protect our rights. Y'all take care. It's been great talking to y'all. Peace.